Good evening. This is Reflections on the Challenge of Faith with Adrian Roberts. The first reading, taken from the Sunday readings this Sunday, is so hugely long, comprising Genesis chapter 1 and a little bit of Genesis chapter 2, that I just want to start with some scattered reflections before moving on to my main theme. Genesis chapter 1 is about the creation of the universe, the heavens and the earth, as the Hebrew phrase has it, i.e. everything. Now, there have been so many debates, rather fruitless in my opinion, that I want to skate very quickly over them before moving on to what I see to be the main themes of this passage. These debates have involved seeing this passage as somehow in competition with scientific cosmologies, Big Bang and the theory of evolution. And I think seeing them that way is totally misjudged. It is anachronistic. The people who wrote this would have had no notion of scientific cosmologies. They were working with a different set of themes. And these themes are no less divinely inspired as anything else in the Bible. And if we look at what the passage actually says, we can see some truths coming out of it, but also some rather difficult approaches on which I want to concentrate. First of all, the 6 days of creation. Is this in competition somehow with the prevailing belief today that the universe is some 13.8 billion years old? Well, I don't think so at all. The 6 days are periods of sacred time. They're not chronological time, as if the writer is seriously suggesting that the whole universe came into being in a mere 6 days. And furthermore, the order of creation, the creatures, the species created in their kinds, is in no way in competition with some sort of theory of evolution of species evolving from other species. There are some coincidental resemblances. The implication in the passage that all space and time came into being in one moment, I suppose, corresponds to certain aspects of Big Bang theory. And I suppose also that the order of plants, fish, animals and humans roughly corresponds to the order in which species appear to have evolved. But I don't think any theory of evolution as such would have been present to the minds of the writers. And yet there is much that we can learn from this passage as we look to see what it was originally intended to convey, and perhaps new things can be learned from it as well. There are things which must have been very important to the people who wrote them, but perhaps less important to us now. The reference to the sun and the moon being lamps in the sky to light our way seems to be in direct challenge to a tendency among ancient nations to worship the sun and the moon as divine beings. And the writers of this passage are setting themselves against this tendency. When we come to the 6th day of creation, I'm sure it's significant that humans and animals are created on the same day, that they perhaps have more in common than we might think, that humans are not set apart from the other animals as some entirely separate type of thing with a soul put in it, as Christian tradition has perhaps too often suggested. But in the original passage here, it is implying that the breath of life is given to both humans and animals are special in their own way and humans special in another way. Humans are indeed set over the animals to be the stewards of creation, to subdue the world and to tame it. But this is seen as rather an oversight over the rest of creation, not an exploitation. After all, the writers suppose that in God's original intention there is no predation. Humans and animals are to eat vegetation. There is no eating of meat. I don't suppose it was ever thus, and this passage is perhaps more saying how things should be than how things ever actually were. But I think one of the most interesting and challenging things about this passage is the regular repetition of the phrase, "and God saw that it was good," culminating with, at the very end of creation, when God institutes the Sabbath day, the necessary day of rest, so that those who wish to work all the time and leave no space for reflection, recreation and the worship of God, and perhaps more importantly, those who are oppressed by others and made to work all the time, are being given this day of rest, this day of recreation, this space for God. After that declaration of the Sabbath, there is the declaration by God, when he looks at all that he's created, that it was very good. Now this provides us with something of a problem, because when we look at the world around us, it doesn't look very good at all. Whence all the suffering, all the brokenness, all the death, all that has gone wrong with the world. It would be comparatively easy to deal with this problem by suggesting that the world doesn't matter, that the physical world can be transcended, that we can pursue a purely spiritual enlightenment. And that way is a very attractive way, and it's very compelling, and it has a lot of wisdom in it. It avoids the so-called problem of evil and suffering. Why has God created a world in which these things go wrong? But rather than adopting the strategy of escaping from this world into some spiritual alternative, the book of Genesis makes it clear that this physical world that God has created is good. And so the problem arises. Why doesn't it appear to be good? Why is it so full of suffering, of death, and of pain? Well, I think one of the ways we can approach this is by looking at the teachings of Jesus in Matthew chapter 6, the Gospel for the day, where Jesus counsels his followers not to worry about all the things that could go wrong in their lives, but to contemplate the lilies of the field, how they neither spin nor toil, but are clothed in more beauty than the great King Solomon. And I think this counsel not to worry, to rest assured in God's love, in the gift that God has given us of creation, may appear to be callow, it may appear to be unrealistic, but I think it does contain a deep wisdom. After all, when we look at the world as a whole, we look to the past and we see all the things that have gone wrong in the past, and we look to the future and we have fears for things going wrong in the future. But the only past of which we can have any genuine awareness is the past through which we have lived. The future has yet to exist at all. And the only real awareness we have of the pain and suffering in the world is the pain and suffering that we contemplate in our own slice of history, our own slice of time, which we have experienced. And this may not be the whole story. Jesus talks much of the kingdom, a future reality in which, if we hold the faith and we keep our trust in God, a reality which will be utterly wonderful, which will be a fulfillment. And this theme is taken up even more strongly in the other reading set for the day from St. Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 8, where he tries to look at the bigger picture, the whole picture in fact, where he contemplates God's good creation of the physical world, of all the things that we hold dear, and he views its sufferings as a groaning in the act of giving birth, as if the entire creation is waiting for its glorious fulfillment. A glorious fulfillment which we will not see in this life, and certainly not in the slice of life that we are presently experiencing, however difficult that may be. And this idea of creation itself, groaning as it waits for fulfillment, encapsulates a deeper truth. It suggests that Jesus didn't just come to save humans in the sense of plucking us from an evil and corrupt world into some alternative paradise, but that Jesus came to save and fulfill the whole of creation. And this idea is taken up by the early church father St. Irenaeus in the 2nd century with his idea of recapitulation, where all that has gone wrong with the world, whatever that was caused by, all the brokenness and the lack of fulfillment in it, all the blighted hopes and the sufferings, are taken up and fulfilled into something glorious, something finished, something perfected. And this is not just for the experience of humans, but it is for the whole universe itself. The whole universe itself is being prepared for a glorious destiny. Now this is a huge and perhaps you may think an unrealistic hope. But we should surely be aware that the tiny slice of life of which we have direct awareness is just that, a tiny slice of reality. We do not know what the future holds. And why shouldn't we look at the universe around us, see the goodness in it, and trust and hope that that goodness will one day be fulfilled in the good purposes of God? and that when God looked at the universe he had created and saw that it was very good, he was looking forward to the fulfillment that would be brought about by Christ's redemptive work in coming among us and restoring not just human lives to a glorious fulfillment, but the life of the universe as a whole. That may seem an excessively bold hope, but it is a wonderful hope, and it is one where we look around us and we see that all that we love around us does have to die, does have to come to an end. But we can also believe that nothing has been created in vain, and all that has died will be brought to a glorious fulfillment in the purposes of God through the work that was done by Christ. And in that hope we can continue to do our work, to seek to live by the values of the kingdom which Christ brought in his coming and will be yet fulfilled. Good evening.